to put what we're doing tonight in the context, like I like to do that all the time. First of all, in the context of what is emotional sobriety? Herb and I get that question asked to us an awful lot. And you probably, if you stuck around, you'd probably and heard us talk, 10 years ago about it. Our answer is probably going to be very different today than it was then, which is wonderful because it means that our consciousness is evolving too. And in a way, that is what emotional sobriety is about. It's about bringing an expanded consciousness to our life. And we talk now about a consciousness that creates a freedom, an emotional freedom, an emotional autonomy. Now, what makes that so important? And let's just put it in the bigger picture of what is differentiation, because in many ways, what we're talking about is that the steps follow an arc that is very similar to the arc that is created when someone goes into psychotherapy or any kind of a conversion experience that changes them from one state of being to another state of being. Um, what is differentiation? Well, differentiation is an experience that we all have. We are born to differentiate ourselves. Cells start differentiating as we come into being, inside of a mother's womb. When we're born, we take the first step towards being our own person. And instead of relying on our mother's umbilical cord for our oxygen, what's the first step towards our differentiation? We breathe for ourselves. Later on, about a year, we no longer want to be carried around. We're ready to walk on our own. You don't have to tell a child to walk. A child wants to walk because there is this powerful force in us. Like to think of it as the growth force that moves you to be what you can be. So a child with on their own, once they develop a certain ability to coordinate themselves by crawling, and we call it doing baby yoga. They start to
Class 1805.
hold on one second. They start to develop core muscles. They develop the ability to coordinate, their muscles with the different parts of the brain. Um, all of this stuff starts to take place so that right around a year, they pull themselves up on a coffee table and they let go because they're learning how to balance. As soon as they not nail the balancing operation, they're ready to take their first step. That's differentiation. The child is becoming what it could be. It's moving towards a wholeness. It wants to be whole. We want to be whole. And so child starts to walk. It takes its first few steps and inevitably it's going to fall and make mistakes. How many times will it fall? As many times as a child needs to until it masters walking. Then when it walks, is walking good enough? Of course not. What's it want to do next? Run, right? The kid gets up and starts to take off. And now mom's right. Now we got these leashes that you see it. If you go to Disneyland, you see kids that are running now because their mom's got their leashes on their kids, right? Just like you have leashes on dogs so they don't run away. They don't want to lose their kids at Disneyland. I love watching that. So this process happens through life. Biologically, neurologically, it's hardwired, it's instinctual. Emotionally, to differentiate ourselves is a whole different process. It takes having a secure attachment when we're, very, very young, when we're infants. That attachment forms a certain foundation for our life that allows us to grow into what we can be. Well, none of us have that kind of a childhood. It's unfortunate because to have that childhood, you'd have to have parents that are mature. And guess what? In our culture, we do not have a high degree of maturity. You guys that are not in the United States can just look at our political system and what's going on now to see how mature we are here in the United States, right? Oh my God. It's got to be a joke in terms of what's going on here, in terms of the way that the dialogue goes and total lack of disrespect for differences and no kind of intellectual discussion of the issues and trying to find the best path. It's all about winning. It's this very sad state of affairs, but it does represent, even the dialogue represents our lack of differentiation. That's the problem. As we become more differentiated, there's a greater tolerance for differences. When we're undifferentiated, we have all of these unenforceable rules, how people need to behave for us to be okay. That's what Bill saw when he started to look at the causes of his depression, that his well-being was so dependent on how other people behaved, on how circumstances unfolded in his life, on what was going on. And every one of us in this room can relate to that. Every one of us, if you look at the situations that get you upset and disturbed, things aren't going the way you think they're supposed to go. They aren't going the way you want them to go. And none of us are very good at dealing with disappointment. Emotional sobriety is learning how to have what Herb and I have come to call an appropriate and honest relationship to reality, where when we're disappointed, we can deal with disappointment and not globalize and make this, oh my God, so nothing's ever going to go right. No, this isn't going right. How do I best respond to this situation? See, that's what we never asked of ourselves. What is the best way for me to respond to the situation I am being confronted with or that I've even created right now? What's the best possible choice of the thousands of choices available to us? But you see, none of those choices can be selected if we are reactive. And the more undifferentiated we are, the more reactive we're going to be to situations in our life. So, what is emotional sobriety? It's becoming differentiated in your life. It's not letting the situation, it's not being claimed by the experience you're having. That's a better way to say it. It's not being claimed by the experience you're having. It's learning to claim the experience you're having. I'll say that again. It's not being claimed by the experience you're having. It's learning to claim the experience you're having and finding your best possible response to that situation. That's what freedom is about, is to move beyond our reactivity to being responsive to life. Now, when we get to that level of differentiation, we learn to act for ourselves without being selfish, and we learn to act for others without losing ourselves. We act for self without being selfish, and we learn to act for others without losing ourselves and getting lost in the relationship. That requires an incredibly high level of differentiation. That is not only the goal of good psychotherapy. It's not only the goal of it's the goal of emotional sobriety, but it's also the goal that we achieve when we work the 12 steps. And so now Herb and I have been taking you through these steps and helping you see how we move towards that, what Bill called a true independence of spirit. You can see how that relates to what I'm talking about. Bill called it a true independence of spirit. All right, so let's kind of look at the force that's involved in the steps and what happens. You've heard me talk about this before, but it's always worth going over. The steps are based on a model of creating a certain charge, a certain tension that then becomes resolved in the next step. So when you work, let's say step one, which creates an incredible tension and charge of energy, you find yourself in an utter state of hopelessness. Bill talks about the program of recovery being based upon a pedestal of hopelessness. Now, why is that? It's because we have to get to the point where we are open to seeing that the way that we have been functioning in this world, The way that we've been meeting this world, our attitudes, our beliefs, our ideas just haven't worked. That's why we talk about first being powerless over whatever our problem is, our addiction, our alcohol, food, or whatever it is. But then it goes on to say that our lives are unmanageable. And they're unmanageable well before the problem started with us. We go down to the causes and conditions. You see, because any life that's based on things have to go my way for it to work is not going to work. Bill called it putting the cart before the horse. It's an impossible way of life. As in the big book, it says we're the actors thinking we're the directors, and we're going to write the script for everybody and expect them to do everything we want them to do so that we're okay. Well, we go on and on and on like that in life. And of course, that doesn't work. That keeps us stuck. That keeps us immature. That keeps us from growing up. We don't learn how to deal with life when that's our attitude. We get pretty good at manipulating other people or trying to. That's what that cultivates. So step one creates this charge, right? I'm hopeless. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I have this problem that's destroying my life, but I don't have any solution. It throws us into an existential crisis. That crisis gets resolved in step two. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step two is all about hope. There is a solution, but it's based on a consciousness that's very different than the consciousness that you've had that has created the problems. That's what we're told. That there's another possibility out here that we know nothing about, but it's there. This hope that we get from step two starts to resolve that existential crisis. But hope without direction and action is a fantasy. It's not going to go anywhere. It's a false hope. It's got to be grounded in some specific reality-based action. And that's what happens. So now there's a new tension involved. Oh my God, I have hope, but how am I going to realize this? That's the new tension. And what gets resolved in step three? Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. We made a decision. Herb emphasizes that all the time. It's making a decision. It's making a commitment to a new way of life. That resolves what that step two created, that tension. My God, how am I going to do this? Well, I'm going to commit myself to creating this new way of life. That commitment becomes essential. And now, after you commit yourself, that creates a new, I'm committed. All right, now what do I do? Step four comes along. Okay, make a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourself. You got attention. What am I going to do? All right, now you got to resolve it, make this inventory. Okay, I've got direction. I start to make my inventory. I start to sit down, fearless and moral, right? We take a look at who we are, right? Not who we like to think we are, but who we are. If we do that very, 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 very thoughtfully, we're going to see how this emotional dependency that Bill talked about has crept into, has influenced our life in a major way. And that all of the troubles we are having is because we haven't grown up. That's the basic flaw we have. We're stuck. We have not grown up. We expect way too much from life and way too little from ourselves. That is our basic problem. I'll say it again. We expect way too much from life and way too little of ourselves. So we see that. Now, what do we got to do with that? We sit with that. That creates a new tension. I'm aware of all these things now. Okay, share it with someone else. You know, we admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. So we take now what we're learning about ourselves and we do something that's been hard, is we become authentic with someone else and let them see who we really are. See, now we're starting to see that this recovery is really about, it's a relational issue. It's learning how to be in relationship in a healthy way to others. And authenticity is such an important part of that. So we share these things. We get feedback. We like to think of share this with someone who's an enlightened witness who can listen to you and listen beyond the words, beyond what you've written, to see things that maybe are hard for you to look at this point in time. You know, the truth is that when we do this inventory early on in our recovery, we can only be so honest with ourselves. And that's why we advocate going back and working the steps. You know, Herb has found this in his step workshop. People come back in after 20 years and do another inventory, and the things they learn at that point are so much, they're so much richer and deeper and textured than they were when we did the first thing and after in our first year of recovery. And so this program is about evolving all the time. And that's what happens when we do work this step. So we share these things with another human being, we get some feedback, and now we're left with, okay, what do we do with all this, right? There's a new tension. Okay, I'm aware I've developed this ability to search myself. We call it self-searching, right? A practice of self-examination, of self-awareness. And that's what we're doing. We're increasing our awareness of ourselves as we go along. This is so critical in terms of emotional sobriety, is to become aware and to become curious about ourselves. You see, that's the same thing that's happening. Through all these steps, we are recovering our interest in ourselves and our curiosity that there are new possibilities in our life. It's a incredible process. It's when I think about it and what I'm describing, it's just fascinating what's happening here. So now we're on step 6, like we're entirely ready. We're to have these defects of character removed. So step 6 now is the resolution of what started in step 5, but it's going to create a new tension. But let's take a very good look at what's happening in step 6. I'm going to read a little bit to you from my book, 12 Hidden Rewards of Making Amends. The first part of this book, I talk about the therapeutic value of the 12 steps. And the second part of this book is that what happens, what are the effects that you have when you make an amends on your person? But I want to read a little bit about what I say about step 6 here. So we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. What is the therapeutic effect of this? Well, what we're doing is we're trying to aim at developing our best possible attitude towards ourselves and towards our life and towards our relationship with others. That's the goal here. Aiming at developing the best possible attitude we have. So I say here, the ability to step up and accept responsibility to change separates the willing from the unwilling. Our commitment to rid ourselves of those flaws, those character flaws that cause problems with our fellows and with society at large, is at the heart of the spirit of recovery. I would include today, it caused problems with our relationship with ourselves as well. We are aiming at becoming our best self. We must remember, however, that desire doesn't equal ability. I will say that again, and I want to elaborate on that. Desire doesn't equal ability. I can say I want to develop my best possible attitude towards myself, towards other people, towards life itself. But saying that, despite of all of the we're told about, you know, positive thinking, right? If you think it, you can, it's the secret, right? You put it in your mind, it's going to happen. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that, unfortunately. I wish that was true, but that's, and to me, in some areas, that was great. But in most areas, especially when it comes to dealing with some of these issues that we have, takes much more than that. See, because what we're going to learn in step 6 is that we have to understand that those things that we've developed became a part of, became habits and patterns. Excuse me, let me say again. What we're going to learn in step 6 is that these habits and patterns that we've developed, we developed because we believe that's how we had to be to ensure our existence. You see, every one of these things plays a function in our life. My mentor, Dr. Kempler, said a symptom or a character default or defect, whatever you want to call it, serves many different purposes in our life. The first thing that it does is it economizes our distress. You guys have to hear that. It economizes our distress. Now, how does it economize our distress? Because it binds up all of the anxiety and pain that we have from what's going on in our existence. Let's just say you were traumatized as a child. The suppression of that trauma economizes your distress. It pushes it out of your consciousness, it puts it into your unconscious, puts it away so that you don't have to walk around feeling devastated by the trauma all the time. If you didn't get to ask for what you want when you were a child and speaking up for yourself was discouraged, in fact, you were shamed or put down because of it. Well, your adaptation is to that is going to be to find a way to ask for what you want without being straight about it. Instead of saying, I would like this, you're going to say, um, boy, that chair looks comfortable. Instead of saying, I would love to sit in that chair, you're going to say, that chair looks comfortable, hoping somebody's going to say, oh, would you like to sit in that chair? Come on, sit over here in that chair then. You see the difference? Oh, that chair looks comfortable versus saying, I would love to sit over there. Would you mind trading places with me? You see, that indirect way of coping with things was done because it wasn't safe to say what you wanted. But as we grow ourselves and as we become more differentiated, it's necessary to learn to support ourselves. For me to be able to ask for what I want or to be able to declare what I don't want. You see, because if I don't, the greater degree of my inability to support myself is going to create a higher dependence on you. So the less I'm able to stand for myself, ask for what I want, the more I'm going to depend on you doing those things for me that I'm not able to mobilize myself. Now, this gets even more complicated when you get in a relationship because now you get love involved in this thing. And we have love so confused with dependency, it's ridiculous. If you love me, you'll give me everything I want. If you love me, you'll do what I want. If you love me, you'll live eternally for me. If you love me, you'll think the way I want you to think, or you'll think the way I think. If you love me, you'll know what I want even before I ask you. Oh my goodness, I've said that. Haven't you said that before? My God, if you love me, you'd know that I don't want that. No, come on now. So we need to start looking at how our defects of character are really, that's why we like to think of them as character defaults rather than defects, because they are adaptations to the situation you're in. Yes, they're bad habits. They need to be cleaned up, but you have to understand the function they're serving in your life before you can let them go. Because trying to just say, I'll let this go without understanding what it's doing for you it will create so much resistance and you won't be able to let it go. So if you're trying to let go of something and you're not looking at what it's doing for you first and taking responsibility for that, that's probably what's making it hard to let go of that behavior, of that bad habit. Everything we do has a function to it, whatever it is. One of the things that we're going to see when we start to really examine how we function is that we do not know how to act for ourselves without being selfish. So we go back to what I said earlier. We're going to be very clear that it's a very black and white thing. That if I act for myself and it's going to be selfish, I'm going to be thinking about myself. And if I act for you, I'm not going to be thinking about myself. I'm just going to be thinking about you. Another way of describing emotional sobriety, it's by obtaining a balance in our life. That's why we say emotional sobriety is learning to act for yourself without being selfish and to act for others without losing yourself. See, there's that balance, right, in our life. So I will be able to bring my best to the situation, my best self to the situation when I'm aware of you, when I'm aware of myself, and when I'm aware of what's going on in the situation. If I take all of that into consideration, I can come up with the best possible response, not reaction, to that situation I'm in. But if I only think about the situation, or if I only think about you, or if I only think about myself, no, my response is I will have a reaction then that will be based on just parts of who I am, not all of who I am. Let's take this common, we hear people talk all the time about the importance of compromise in a relationship, right? A lot of people think, well, when you marry someone or you're in a relationship with someone, it's very important to compromise in that relationship. I think we've been misled in that because compromise often means giving up and going along with what the other person wants while you don't get what you want. And then what we do is we kind of, it's like okay, I compromised last time, it's your turn. Or I've compromised the last 5 times. Now you can compromise at least once in this relationship, can't you? My God, why am I always the one that's compromising? Have you ever said something like that? I have. We say stuff like that. What we're learning to do with emotional sobriety is to cooperate with integrity, is to be able to cooperate with someone and go along with what they want, but because we want to do it, not because we're compromising ourselves. And if we can't do it, then it's a no deal. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means being able to have empathy. You see, one of the things that gets compromised in our development, when we don't grow and differentiate ourselves, then empathy does not, then being able to have empathy is compromised. We can have a certain degree of empathy, but it's not going to be a real deep empathy. It's not going to be able to really tune into what's important to ourselves and someone else at the same time. You see, that's the nature of when empathy is at its best. It's where I'm tuned into what's important to me, but I'm also tuned into what's important to you, that I see me and I see you. Martin Buber called that the I to thou relationship. That's the healthiest relationship that exists when we're both present at the same time. I can't do that when I expect you to take care of me. I can't see you. You don't become a person anymore. You become an it. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. It means helping relieve us from treating other people as objects, as it's not as subjects. That's what we need to learn. And the same with ourselves is not to treat ourselves as an object that needs to be manipulated into something good because we're bad. We're not. Herb and I have been trying to talk about how to get rid of all of the pathology here that we use to talk about ourselves. We are not sick people needing to get, or we are sick people needing to get better is one way of looking at us. But the better way to think about it is that it's what's right about us that we haven't honored that has made us sick. You see, we need to be what we can be to be all right. That's the wonderful insight that Maslow had. It's when we don't honor our true self is when people get sick. And as soon as you restore, that's why we say that the 12 steps really help us recover who we really are. They recover our true self. That's when people get well. Not only do they get well, they thrive. They become what they can be. They become better than they've ever been before. You can see it when somebody's embracing the steps. There's an aura about them in terms of what's going on. Man, they are so connected. They're spiritual. There's this wonderful energy that comes from them. That's the quest that we're on. That's the path that we're taking at this point in time. So in this step, we sit down and we take a look at all of these adaptations that we've had. We take a look at how they developed to serve us. What did we get out of them? What was their function? And then we start to think, what do I have to do to now function in a better way to replace what these things were doing with a healthier adaptation? If you use a software analogy, we're updating the operating system, is what we're doing. We're really sitting back and we're trying to update the operating system. We're letting go of these old ideas that were based on years prior and functioning prior and based on a consciousness that was an I'm okay if consciousness, a very undifferentiated consciousness, to a new consciousness that says I'm okay even if things don't go my way. I don't need things to go my way to be okay. I need to be a certain way to be okay. Bill says when we get there, we have a foundation that is so strong to live the rest of our life. So Dr. James Bugental, who's an existential humanistic therapist, defined resistance as the impulse to protect one's familiar identity and known world against a perceived threat. I'll read that to you again, because that's at the heart of this, right? Is being able to identify our resistance to change, because our resistance means we're holding on to that old way of being, and we don't have faith that there's something better for us to do. It's the impulse to protect one's familiar identity and known world against a perceived threat. I say it this way, our fabricated self forms the basis for our identity and our worldview. This is who we believe we are. Fabricated self being our false self. This is who we believe we are. It is the familiar to us, while the true self is not. The true self is a stranger. It's an alien. The true self is like an acorn that has never grown into the oak tree. We therefore are much more familiar with our false self than we are with our true self. It's just a concept. We don't have any experience with it. The strength of the resistance will run into that we will run into will be proportionate to the degree that we have identified with our false self. So the more I think that this is what I am is is going to create the more difficulty I'm going to have in letting it go. So the degree I've identified with these things that I think I need to be okay is going to be the degree to which I encounter resistance in letting them go. The more we identified with our false self, the more resistance we will experience in letting go or letting it go. Let me give you an example from a clinical experience. I had a very powerful session with a man who was attending one of my retreats on emotional sobriety. 53 men had gathered with me at this beautiful retreat center near Wappinger Falls in New York to explore their emotional recovery. In these retreats, I used Bill Wilson's Grapevine article on emotional sobriety to discuss the issues within us that interfere with our emotional sobriety. Bill Wilson identified his almost absolute dependence on people and places and things for his emotional well-being as his problem. His self-esteem depended on how people reacted to him. It was dependent on things going according to his expectations. I refer to this as emotional dependency. Emotional dependency creates serious problems in our human relations. It generates a set of rules that specify how our partner needs to behave in order for us to feel loved and accepted. We try to regulate others to meet our expectations so that we feel okay. Our emotional dependency creates unenforceable rules. When we are upset is because someone is not adhering to our demands. One of the men at the retreat, we will call him Roberto, discussed how upset he was with his wife and son. I asked him to be more specific. He said that when either of them did the dishes, they left them sitting in a drying rack in the sink instead of drying them off and putting them away. Which is how the dishes should be done. Does this sound familiar to anybody? It infuriated, it infuriated him that they ignored his wishes. When I told him that he was being unreasonable, he became indignant. You got to be kidding me, Doc, he explained. They weren't doing things the way they were supposed to be. What he didn't realize is that his unrelenting demands were based on an unhealthy dependency that made him take their behavior personally. That is the belief that hooked him. If his wife and son complied, it would make him feel accepted and validated. He would feel loved. Their lack of cooperation meant that he was insignificant. The reflected sense of himself that he saw in their disobedience made him feel rejected, hurt, and angry. His unenforceable rule was, you must do things the way I want you to because it will make me feel loved and accepted. His false self demanded obedience. He raged at them when he didn't get it, trying to intimidate them into compliance. They weren't caving in, and he didn't know what to do. He was in a panic, desperate for their love, which made him even more demanding and tyrannical. I confronted him about his rules, but this wasn't getting him any closer to what he was doing. Remember, we have a way of making the unreasonable seem reasonable. He couldn't see what he was doing. He was too invested in his way of being, right? There was that resistance that I was talking about. Then it hit me. I wondered who in his past had taught him that doing things the way they were supposed to do them was the most important rule in life. I asked him if he could remember a time in his life when someone made him follow outside rules more important than understanding him, his feelings, his aspirations, his life. He paused and then put his head in his hands and he started to cry. When I asked him what was going on, he said he felt embarrassed. I tried to make it okay that he was crying by telling him that he must have remembered something very painful because his pain broke through in his defense. He went on to tell me that his childhood was very sterile. That was my word, not his. His mother spent more time ironing his underwear than she spent enjoying time with him. Hmm. His father was never home because he worked all the time. He picked coffee beans and worked late into the night and on weekends. Roberto was emotionally neglected as a child, which left a large hole in his heart. His mother and father justified their method of child rearing. This is the way things had to be, they told him. What happened next started his recovery, his emotional recovery. I told him that the pain he was experiencing was the same pain that his wife and child felt when he made the dishes more important than them. Wow, what an insight. His eyes opened wide and he cried even harder. He had broken the trance that his false self had placed on him. He could now see the reality and real effects of his behavior. He was now ready to let go of this character defect, making the character defect, meaning making things more important than people. Great example. So as I said, character defects do three things, right? They economize our distress, they're a cry for help, and they communicate the experience we need to resolve it. And that's what we saw with Roberto. It's the remedy is adding more empathy. That is the empathy. That is the remedy to this difficulty. Is if you step back and try to really empathize with the other person and what's going on, it can change the whole dynamic of what's happening because what I described was a complete lack of empathy on each person's part. The family, had they heard how important this was to him, that when it came up in the future, they could say, Dad, just because I don't do the dishes doesn't mean I don't love you. Come over here, let me give you a hug, right? And that could have changed the dynamic, but it can change the dynamic in terms on his part when he realizes, my God, I'm not seeing them. I'm just wanting them to do what I want them to do. So this is the important thing that we learned about relationships. It doesn't do any good to try to blame one person or the other for the difficulty, because the truth is that the healthier focus is focusing on what can be done to change things. And what can be done to change things is that anybody in the relationship, if they have a new perspective, can have an impact and change the dance that's going on. That's what Byron Katie means when it says it only takes one clear person to have a better relationship. As soon as you start to see what the reality is of what's going on, there are new possibilities in terms of the interaction. So look, if you think about applying the same principles to your relationship with your body, you're telling your body, I'd be okay if. And I understand that it's you're going through hell and all those other things. But the big question is what, and this is something that you do if you were in therapy. You'd put your body outside of yourself and you'd have a dialogue with it. And you'd probably start out by saying, I hate you and what you're doing to me. I can't stand. You're limiting me, you're limiting my life. And then your body would answer, this has nothing to do about you. I'm struggling, or whatever it would say back. But see, that write down that dialogue between you and your body will be priceless and will help you see what you might be able to do to add some acceptance and empathy to the situation. It's such an interesting question because if you think about what the person is saying is you're still saying that that person is so skilled at knocking you off balance. It means that you haven't figured out a way to respond to them, and it'd be better to focus on what you're doing rather than how skillful they are, right? So that's number one. um, this is where we need each other, right? This is where psychotherapy comes in, a good sponsor comes in, is we take these troubles we're having, especially somebody familiar with emotional sobriety, and you try to look at what your unenforceable rule is, because I imagine where you're getting knocked off balance is still having something to do with your dependency on that person. And that dependency is going to manifest itself as some rule, some claim, some demand you have on how they're supposed to behave if they care for you. Well, it definitely can help. I'm not trained in nonviolent communication, but what I understand about it is it's trying to relate to another person in a very, very respectful way, which I'm all for. Um, I think the most challenging thing about communication is that it's very difficult for all of us to ask for what we want and to tell somebody what we'd like. Not many people feel, first of all, like they have a right to do that. Some of us feel unworthy about it. Some of us feel that that would be really demanding and too selfish. But it really is the core of healthy communication is, one of the things I learned with Dr. Kempler is when we're an adult, there's only two reasons to do anything in our life because we want to or don't. And that has to be the basis. If I'm going to be talking to you and you really want me to do something and I don't, it's very important for me to tell you I don't. Now, maybe I can, and I would inquire in terms of what makes it important to you because I want to act for myself without being selfish. So I can say to you, what makes that so important that you want that from me? Because I'm not moved to do that right now. And then you may say some things that help me change my mind. Then I can act for you without losing myself. But see, that's the basis of a healthy interaction, is where it's I to thou. I don't know how much of that is emphasized in nonviolent communication, but I hope it is. Probably both. Yeah, yeah, it's both. I mean, I think what you're describing is that, that you have a difficult time supporting yourself. And maybe a part of that is afraid of that if you go after it, you might fail. And then what will that mean, right? Is there a part of you that's going to be then, very punitive and harsh with you about failing? So then it's safer not to try. See, all of that can be tied in because emotional sobriety is being free from that fear and being able to learn to address it. We need to give our fear respect, but not privilege. When we give our fear privilege, it controls our life. When we respect it, we learn from it. We say, hey, not making a mistake is important to me, but at the same time, it's ridiculous to expect myself not to. Like I would say, a higher self, a more mature self to the situation that says, look, we're going to make mistakes. The issue is learning from them. That's how a child walks. Like, thank God a child doesn't have an adult consciousness, right? We'd all be crawling today, right? After a few times, we'd say, hey, this walking stuff is for other people. It's not for us. Let me try something else. Oh boy, Herb. Um, hopefully what Herb and I have been doing the last 20 years is trying to expand the consciousness in the program to be able to embrace these perspectives, right? And um, I think in Thursday night, if you come to some of the emotional sobriety workshops, you might hear somebody sharing in there that you'll be attracted to, and then you could approach that person. I think that would be the best vehicle. Herb may know of some people because he's does the workshops all the time, so he might be another resource for that. But this was the whole focus on Ernie Larson's book, Destination Joy. Is he realized that what happened to a lot of people, the analogy he used, Patrick, was that like these issues that were put into our unconscious are like bone chips from fractured bones, right? And that sometimes it takes 15, 20 years. I'm a combat veteran. If you got shrapnel, it takes sometimes a long time for that shrapnel to work its way to the surface. When it breaks through your skin, it hurts like hell, right? And that's the analogy he used. When these bone chips surface, they hurt like hell. What do we have to do? At this point in time now, step 6 and 7 is about embracing that pain and now starting to heal some of the unresolved issues that have existed within us that sometimes we know very little about. It took me only the last 10 years to deal with my sexual molestation and stuff. And I'm right in the middle of dealing with a lot of that stuff right now. So it's a great question, Patrick. And, it's a big, important part of emotional sobriety.